who passed away last summer. This story is from the prologue of his memoir called Walking with the Wind. And the text I'm reading has been adapted by Reverend Karen Johnston. So this story is called Walking with the Wind. This true story comes from John Lewis, a great leader who died in July 2020. Many people were sad to lose him and thankful for all he has done to bring about justice in our nation. He had lived a long and full life, asking of himself and asking of all of us to show up for justice, to do what we can, and just a little bit more, to make sure there was more fairness in our country. This month, our theme is beloved community, and in RE this morning with the kids, we talked about anti-racism and how our differences are beautiful and bring us closer together. And we talked about honoring our Black leaders. So I hope this story is an extension of that. John Lewis grew up in a large family, and he would often spend time with his aunts or uncles, with his siblings and cousins. There were many children in the neighborhood, and they would play together. Now, this was a long time before the pandemic, so everyone could play together and hang out. Mr. Lewis tells about a time when he was playing outside his Aunt Seneva's house with about 14 other children when a storm, a big storm, arrived, a kind of storm that made him very afraid. Now I'm going to tell the story from his perspective, so it's like he's talking. So when I say I, it really means Mr. John Lewis. Aunt Seneva was the only adult around, and as the sky blackened and the wind grew stronger, she herded us all inside. Now, her house was not the biggest place around, and it seemed even smaller with so many children squeezed inside. Small and surprisingly quiet. All of the shouting and laughter that had been going on earlier outside had stopped. The wind was howling now, and the house was starting to shake. We were scared. Even Aunt Seneva was scared. And then it got worse. Now the house was beginning to sway. The wood plank flooring beneath us began to bend. And then a corner of the room started lifting up. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. None of us could. This storm was actually pulling the house toward the sky with us inside it. And that was when Aunt Seneva told us to clasp hands. Line up and hold hands, she said, and we did as we were told. Then she had us walk as a group toward the corner of the room that was rising. From the kitchen to the front of the house we walked, the wind screaming outside, sheets of rain beating on the tin roof. Then we walked back in the other direction as another end of the house began to lift. And so it went back and forth, 15 children walking with the wind, holding that trembling house down with the weight of our small bodies. Can you imagine what it was like to be inside of that house, afraid that it might fall apart from the destructive force of the wind and the rain, from the whole storm? I'm so glad that John Lewis wasn't alone, that he was there with his friends and family. I'm so glad they figured out a way to work together. When John Lewis was much older and was writing down the story of his whole astounding life, he wrote these words. More than half a century has passed since that day of the storm, and it has struck me more than once over those many years that our society is not unlike the children in that house, rocked again and again by the winds of one storm or another, the walls around us seeming at times as if they might fly apart. It certainly seemed that way in the 1960s at the height of the civil rights movement, when America itself felt as if it might burst at the seams. So much tension, so many storms. But the people of conscience never left the house. They never ran away. They stayed. They came together and they did the best they could, clasping hands and moving toward the corner of the house that was the weakest. And then another corner would lift, and we would go there. And eventually, inevitably, the storm would settle, and the house would still stand. But we knew another storm would come, and we'd have to do it all over again. So we did, and we still do, all of us, you and I. We are children holding hands, walking with the wind. Thank you for listening to this story, not my story, but Mr. John Lewis's story. And thank you for the beloved community we share together.
Today's centering words come from Martin Luther King. My cat, sorry. But the end is reconciliation. The end is redemption. The end is the creation of the beloved community. It is this type of spirit and this type of love that can transform oppressors into friends. The type of love that I stress here is not eros, a sort of aesthetic or romantic love, not philia, a sort of reciprocal love between personal friends, but it is agape, which is understanding goodwill for all men. It is an overflowing love which seeks nothing in return. It is the love of God working in the lives of men. This is the love that may well be the salvation of our civilization.
So I posted these lyrics on Facebook and people said they wanted to hear it. So here we are. No soul sings alone. There's turquoise sparkling in the summer sky, and emeralds dancing in the kitten's eyes. I know stardust lays on blue each cloudy night. A diamond in your heart is shining now, oh so bright, and no soul shines alone. No heart beats on its own. There's a spark of life within us that connects us to the whole, and a song of joy we're singing as we realize love's our real home. No soul sings alone. There are pieces warm out hanging in the sun, and cherries ripe for picking by someone. I hear hummingbird wings beat a rhythm of love. Wildflowers are singing, we are here for everyone, and no soul sings alone. No heart beats on its own. There's a spark of life within us that connects us at the soul, and a song of joy we're singing as we realize love's our real home. No soul sings alone. The rivers kiss the mountains and the meadows feed the birds, and your laughter, I am certain, is the sweetest sound I've ever heard. There's a gentle breeze blowing through your hair, and the smell of summer rain fills up the air. I love days we dance in the rain and laugh with no care. When I look into my heart, you're always dancing there, and no soul sings alone. No heart beats on its own. There's a spark of life within us that connects us at the soul, and a song of joy we're singing as we realize love's our real birds, and your laughter, I am certain, is the sweetest sound I've ever heard. And no soul sings alone.
This community of care is created through our work and time together, our commitment to one another. This is our covenant, to walk together in loving fellowship, to share our hopes and values. As we pass these virtual baskets, we thank you for your generous gift, which supports the work of this religious community and Unitarian Universalism in the world at large. As we listen to We Shall Be Known, if you would like to, throughout the week or anytime, go to grandvalleyuu.org, and there is an online giving tab if you want to do a virtual offering. Always a reminder too, if you go to Amazon Smile and look up Unitarian Universalist Congregation in the Grand Junction, you can sign up and we can get a little donation anytime you purchase anything off of Amazon. So as we take this time together to be in gratitude for this community together, we just thank you for this beloved community that we express every week in so many more ways than just this Sunday.
We shall be known by the company we keep as the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known as the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves back to the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep as the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known as the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that all thrive. It is time we lead ourselves back to the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead as love.
This congregation is a community of ourselves. Its energy and resources are our energy and resources. Its wealth is what we share. As we contribute to its life, we affirm our lives within it.
From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live.
So when I started thinking about what I wanted to talk about this week, there was a repetitive phrase that kept coming into my mind, and it was this image of Dwayne saying, I and thou. Talk about I and thou. And so you can all thank Dwayne this week for your introduction to Martin Buber and his existential theistic Judaism. This is also Black History Month, and I've been reflecting on the centering words from Martin Luther King that Robin read earlier about how beloved community can become an agape type of love. So I decided to attempt to combine these two concepts, and my sermon title became The Agape of the I and Thou. And now, to explain what that actually means will be my real challenge for today. So here we go. When I think about who I want to be in 10 or 15 years, I don't really think in terms of what I want to be doing, but what will be my lived expression in the world? And the only images, like I said, that would come to me were of Dwayne as an example of a person whose heart was genuinely wide open, an expression of embodied unconditional love. And Dwayne used to love to talk about agape and the love that transcends individual human beings and the love of a divine nature expressing itself in all forms of life. And when we would have our building your own theology classes and we would start talking about love, he would also refer to Martin Buber's philosophy of the I and thou relationship. So this week I decided that I needed to take a look and read Buber's I Thou for myself. Martin Buber was an existentialist thinker who was born in Vienna in 1878 and wrote his classic Ich und Du, I and Thou, translated to I and Thou, in 1923. And then it was translated from German into English in 1937. So keep in mind, they have entire college courses on Buber's work. So obviously my 15-minute Wendy synopsis will not even scratch the surface of the depth of what this man is talking about. But I also like to try to make theology come to life for us and to help show how some of these concepts can and do actually make a difference in our lived day-to-day lives in the year 2021. So here we go. From Buber's Judaic theism perspective, he talks about the two ways we express ourselves in the world. According to Buber, as human beings, we are always viewing the world around us as either an I-it objectification or an I-you or I-thou relationship. The I-it expression happens when we view the world and others in it as something apart from ourselves, as mere objects to interact with, whether it be another person, nature, or even God. And we see this so very often in our world today. It's so much of an us, them, the good guys, the enemies, preserving nature versus making corporate profits. There is a me, and there is that which is outside of me, which I can manipulate for my own purposes. There is an I, and there's everything else, which simply becomes a bunch of it's. And I would say this is how the majority of human beings interact in our world today. a world of separation and objectification of everything around us. And many times that includes the people we care about most. The other way to view the world, according to Buber and as expressed by Duane, was the I-you or I-thou relationship. And with this paradigm, I don't see you as the other. I don't see you as a thing. I see you in holy relationship with me. And where there is relationship, there is no separation. I see you as a divine thou. And when we view the world from this perspective, we become a part of all that we view around us. We become relational. Buber gives the example of a tree. We can look at a tree as a collection of parts, of leaves and wood and branches and roots to be chopped down and used for our own purposes as individual items to exploit. Or we can view the tree as a magnificent divine creation with which we interact on a cellular level. Alan Chang summarizes Buber's analogy this way. He writes, "It's not that there are two different worlds. It's more like there are two ways of looking at the same world. I can be an objective observer or a subjective participant. For example, when I study a tree and break it down into its parts, then it becomes an it rather than a you. When I'm in deep awe of the whole tree without trying to understand it, then it becomes a you." When viewed this way, the tree becomes a divine expression of life that is interacting back and forth with us. This relationship we have with the tree becomes an I-thou expression of relationship. We see this often in indigenous worldviews where the rivers are being granted citizenship rights, where the river becomes so much more than a body of water for us to use, abuse, and exploit for our own selfish means. On March 15th, 2017, the BBC reported that a river in New Zealand had become the first in the world to be granted the same legal rights as a person. The New Zealand Parliament passed the bill recognizing the Wanagani River in North Island as a living entity. Long revered by New Zealand's Maori people, the river's interests will now be represented by two people. The Maori had been fighting for over 160 years to get this recognition for their river, a minister said. From the Wanagani viewpoint, the well-being of the river is directly linked to the well-being of the people. And so it is really important that it's recognized as its own identity. The members of the Maori community celebrated the news with tears and music in New Zealand's parliament. The recognition of the I-thou. A relational acknowledgement that we are part of the water, that we need this water to survive, that this water is in relationship with us at our most elemental level. It then becomes holy, and we understand and view the rivers and the streams and the oceans in a new way. What if we did this with everything and everybody around us? What if we began to view every human action from the perspective of I, thou? What if we viewed everything in our life as a divine expression of created beauty? What if we viewed every interaction we have, whether it be with other people or nature, with the gratitude that we just interacted with a divine expression of life, viewing its own creation, its own as creation that we are in relationship with? How might that paradigm change our own worldview and our own experiences in this world? And so, how does this concept work in real life? And I think it's actually pretty simple. What if every time I go to Safeway, I begin to interact in a different way? Instead of seeing Roger as a mere Safeway clerk and a means to an end to purchase my food, I begin to look forward to the opportunity to express love and compassion to another being in the form of a 2-second eye contact and a genuine hidden smile behind the mask. He is then recognized as a thou, as opposed to an it, when I ask him what the input code for bagels is. And really, it's amazing how many of us this year have learned how to smile with our eyes. Another practical way this paradigm could be expressed in the world is through the acknowledgement that perhaps people having a mental health crisis need to have a counselor or social worker show up in their homes instead of police officers. That I, thou paradigm becomes a policy in the budgeting process, and more crisis counselors are hired to work alongside the police in inner cities. And this is literally happening in Denver right now through their new STAR program. This article that Laura sent me this week from the denverright.com says, since June 1st, 2020, a mental health clinician and a paramedic have traveled around the city in a white van, handling low-level incidents like trespassing and mental health episodes that would have otherwise fallen to patrol officers with badges and guns. In its first 6 months, the Support Team Assisted Response Program, or STAR, has responded to 748 incidents. None required police or led to jail time. What if we express the I, thou, recognizing the humanity of young children who were separated from their parents at the border? The I, thou paradigm becomes an executive order to put together a special task force to reunite these children with their families. So you can see that this is more than theology. It is a theology of sorts, but it matters in our expression of day-to-day life for us as embodied human beings. I've been saying over and over that theology matters, that we are all theologians, that there is no room to separate our human life from our understanding of ultimate reality, because it is all deeply connected and one is in constant interaction and relationship with the other. And so my ultimate goal this year is to help us all understand that we are theologians, whether we realize it or not. A few months ago, when Stephania was one of our guest speakers, she told the story about sitting alone in this sanctuary after all the business of the mutual aid distribution was over on a Tuesday afternoon. And she sat down and she cried because she realized that she had found her purpose. It was a holy experience for her because she realized that through her dedicated work to offering food and organizing such a magnificent event every week, she was experiencing that I-thou relationship with everybody who showed up in the parking lot on Tuesdays. Now, I have no idea if Stephania has ever heard of Martin Buber, but I think in that moment, she experienced what he was talking about. And we can all do that every day in our own ways. It was her individuated expression, acknowledging the relationship and the changing of lives of hundreds of people every week. And if I was talking to her, I would probably tell her she's a theologian and she probably doesn't even know it. Because it's not about what we believe. It's never about what we believe. It's about what we know in that inner core of who we are. And when we express our lives from that state of being, we become divine expressions of the holy, regardless of whether we even think that such a thing exists. And so in this post-election, post-pandemic, post-Trump world, I once again begin to reflect on who I want to be and become in this world. I realize I want to be a lived expression of divine love, recognizing and acknowledging the divine essence in every being I encounter. And if I practice doing this in small ways every day of my life, my hope is that by the end, when I take my own last breath, I too will be ready to experience the I-thou of agape love. So I'd like us to take a little bit of time this morning to talk about what that I-thou relationship might look like in each of your lives. Do any of you have examples when this concept has come to life for you? So I'm going to allow us to unmute ourselves, and we'll just have a bit of a conversation. If anybody is courageous enough to take on Martin Buber. Mary, what would you like to say?
I just wanted to relate a short episode on the Green River and Desolation Gray Canyons on a low water trip. We had slogged away all day, 16 or more miles. And where we landed, there was this beautiful cottonwood with a really different growth habit than what you see around here. And I can't even talk anymore. It was wonderful.
Yeah, sometimes those experiences transcend words and language, and that's when you know you've really experienced it. Adrian, would you like to